welcome back. I'm your host, Dochi. Today, I want to start off with a quote that I don't remember the origin of, or where I read it, or who said it, or if it's real. But I think someone said it, or someone said something to the likeness of it, which is that talent is essentially a honeypot, in that it'll lure you into your field, but at a certain point, it almost becomes irrelevant, and it's actually your character that will carry you onwards and upwards. And I say that because this week I learned a very interesting lesson about regarding my writing, which is like for the past 4 months, or 5 months probably, I've sort of really fallen into a very surrealistic and abstract writing form, which has felt very true to me and very good, but I almost feel like after communicating with some people and trying to get this one short film off the ground, which everyone pretty much said, unanimously was not my best work, I kind of realized that style, for me, for the time being, has to be abandoned for at least for a little while in order to get to an even better level with my writing. And I think I've fallen into the trap recently of being far too impressed with what's coming out of me. And, this is like a McConaughey quote, less impressed, more involved. I've been very impressed with what's coming out of me initially now. And I think that speaks to a closeness in my, or a bridging gap in my tastes and my ability. However, I think that in order to really make more of a splash moving forward, it's being impressed with your work as it flows out is not going to be helpful in creating long-standing and great work. And so it is kind of that thing of in order to level up in your ability, it's time to I'll give you an example of this. So I have sort of abandoned this style that I've been writing in lately for a much more realistic and much more kind of as a challenge in my brain, much more like I feel like festivals would like this. Kind of like I've been thinking about that as I've been writing. And it is like, I feel like it's sort of unleashed like a whole new, being able to write in this whole other kind of form that I have been for a long time, I think has made a better, greater impact on my writing in this week than I've experienced in just writing whatever for the past couple months. And I think that is because I became far too comfortable with the style I was writing in. And now with this new style, there's a real freshness and a much more, a much less sort of, I feel like there are two aspects of this kind of work which are worth discussing, which is that like half of you as an artist is going to be based in, like steeped in ideas and trying to capture ideas and differentiating between good and bad ideas and translating ideas, translating the raw images in your head. And the other half of you, though, needs to cultivate the ability to, it's sort of the more logic and strategy approach to the work, to the execution. And this is where I think that like style and structure and these more the more sort of logistic side of the work comes in. And I feel like I've been very comfortable with my ability to generate ideas, but it's actually practicing the strategy and the execution in the style of dialogue, in just how things are written, which I think it's been a really worthwhile challenge to undertake. And I think that thinking of that stuff, for some reason, I never thought much about the style in which I was doing things. I think I was much more concerned with the ideas. And you need both. And I think this sort of leads us into the topic I want to talk about today, which is at a certain point, your talent and your ability in diving into a craft becomes irrelevant and not actually conducive to good work if you don't get to a point where you become a little bit more serious and a little harder on yourself. David Ogilvy was an ad man in the 1960s, and he's a very successful one. And I studied advertising for a year, so I've read a bit of one of his books, Ogilvy on Advertising. But he had a very interesting quote, and I heard this on the Founders podcast, which is a great podcast. I forget the host's name, but he talks about, every episode is on like a CEO or an entrepreneur, but that sort of is a broad term to the host. So like sometimes he's talking about Steve Jobs and other times he's talking about James Cameron. But he did one episode on Ogilvy recently, and there was a few things that sort of stuck out to me, which is Ogilvy had a saying that the and I might butcher this, but it's along the same lines, that the secret to eternal discontent, or the secret to eternal unhappiness, is to be very good at something. It's not enough to be very good. You have to be very, very, very good. And Ogilvy sort of had a message which he spoke to his businesses, which was to chase or to live in a state of divine discontent. And divine discontent, he saw that as an antidote to smugness and a way to keep your work fresh. Steve Jobs one time said, like, what do you do when you do something wonderful? You wake up the next day and you try and do something wonderful again. Father Bronx on the Make Art Not Content podcast, he says that you're not great if you do one great thing. You're great if you do a lot of great things. And I think that all of that is echoed in Ogilvy's idea of divine discontent, of approaching your work not from a place of being impressive with it, but always in a state of trying to top it, or at least always in a state of trying to meet it. And Ogilvy had these great. He really understood creatives, and he viewed the creative process like alchemy. He understood that a lot of the best ideas are born from the unconscious. So what matters most is having good inputs when you're not working, and which I agree with. And he had these 8 habits, which I find very interesting, which I put them on my wall, which are courage, idealism, curiosity, playfulness, candor, intuition, free-spiritedness, and persistence. And for some reason, I think this really resonated with me. It's interesting when you find things in life, because the sort of transition that was happening with my writing was very much like a response to the work I was putting out, and like sharing it to my mentors and my friends, who pretty much all said, like, step it up a little bit. But I actually discovered this podcast and this David Ogilvy stuff when I was just at work listening to podcasts, and yet it's sort of been the perfect meeting of these two ideas in 1 week. But to go through the 8 habits here, because I think they're useful. I'm sorry, I just ate a banh mi, so I'm a little bit I'm on a bit of a crash here. But Ogilvy said that courage, the first habit, courage is in much shorter supply than genius. There are a lot more geniuses in the world than we think, but the thing that is actually lacking is backbone. And I think courage is the thing that will allow you to see through an idea. Courage is the thing that allows you to execute ideas. courage is a thing that allows you to execute ideas. In that, and this is a direct one for me. I've been lately like trying to write something specifically for certain festivals. I've found that the more I look into festivals and the more that I look into sort of how possible any of these dreams are, there's no greater waste of energy and no greater instiller of fear than trying to figure out what exactly is possible. Like Orson Welles once said, he was asked how he made Citizen Kane, and he was like, ignorance, sheer ignorance. And that is actually a really common sentiment in people who do go out and achieve, in entrepreneurs or filmmakers. And I realized that the more I looked into the possibility of like what gets into festivals, and like I think you always got to do your research, but the more I looked into like looking on Reddit and stuff at like other filmmakers talking about it, I found that instead of putting in an input, reading a book or watching a film or doing something that will allow me to better hone my ability, all you're doing there is creating internal obstacles and instilling doubt. And all doubt will ever do is stifle whatever ability you have. It's like the Dune quote, fear is the mind killer. And Ogilvy had a very clear understanding of that you need to be operating from a space where you have the courage to share opinions and where you have the courage to try things. Because the more that your mind is shrouded in fear or obstacle, the more it'll just stunt you. And it's not an input that's conducive to creating good work. And so I've said this, made a big point of this in the last episode. Great work, no matter how it starts, it has to come from a place of freedom. And you need to have the courage to be able to do that. And you need to have the courage to spend your time trying things. And I think this week, that's exactly what I've done. I've tried writing in a completely different style, and I think it's done a lot for my writing. The next one, so courage. Don't be scared and don't take in inputs that instill doubt. Idealism. What you can achieve is the only limit to what you can achieve is the size of your dreams, essentially. And so if you instill, and this sort of ties into fear again, if you instill limits on what you're capable of doing, then that will create roadblocks inside of you to what you can do. So bring it back to me for a second. If I get so used to a style that I don't see that I get too tied to it, and I it limits my ability. And let me give a better example here. Idealism. You know what? Idealism is pretty self-explanatory. If you believe that the greatest work you can do is be a gaffer on an ad, then that's all you're going to really work towards, and that's all, that will be the height of your success. I mean, you may fall into other things, but I think that you need to approach your work with the idealism that if you work hard enough, you can achieve the same thing that the greats did. Reminds me of Steve Jobs again. Anybody who's ever done anything, they're no smarter than you or me. So idealism, dream big. Curiosity, it's kind of a similar thing to what I was saying about courage before and approaching work from freedom. But curiosity is essentially, it links to the being curious about life. As soon as you grow jaded about anything in life, that will stunt what you can form opinions on, and therefore stunt what you put into your work. So you need to keep alive that the eyes of the magic child within you, who could play with toys in his room freely, because otherwise you just, what a mess. Playfulness. I forgot why I was doing this for a second, and then I realized that this show is support for it's for me, and it's instilling it in me. Playfulness. Yeah, have a sense of humor. That was pretty much the gist of that. Great minds all. I think it was necessity is the mother of invention, but playfulness is the father. I don't know. Apparently Einstein liked fart jokes. Just lighten up. Candor. This was a great one, and this is one that I've been having experience with this week. Pitching stuff to my producer friend, who's a bit older and a bit wiser, and we'll roll back into opinions, I think, at the end of this. But candor is surrounding yourself with people who will tell you the truth and telling the truth yourself, and that is indispensable on the road to creating great work, because nothing will... The truth... Great art at its core is telling the truth about something or sharing a secret about something. Maybe not with words, but with feeling. And if you surround yourself with people who will be as impressed with your own work as you are, I think that will... Well, first off, clearly it'll stunt you. But also, the key to eternal unhappiness is to be very good. And if you just get very good at the things that impress you but aren't actually digestible to an audience, then you're not going to get butts and seats. People aren't going to want to witness your work. And so this reminds me of something John Lennon said about Paul. He was like, after the Beatles broke up, he's just like, the problem with Paul is he just surrounds himself with yes men. Now, Paul made great work. I loved Paul's solo stuff, but I think that's still true. I think you can't. You need people who, no matter what happens, and this is not just of mentors or work relationships. I think this is relationships in all aspects of life. People who, no matter how much money you have or where you're at in life, if you're surrounded by people who will kiss the ground you walk on, that is not conducive to a good life or even a clear view of reality. You must have people that will tell you the truth, and that way you know better what is working and what isn't. So, candor, do it. Intuition. I mean, that's all of creativity. That's the money right there. All the source of all ideas is it comes from within. But actually, intuition, I just remembered, in this context, I think means something different. Now, here's the delicate balance. And I don't know if I said this in this take or the other take when my mic wasn't plugged in. But the role of what you're doing, the work itself of what you're doing is split between your ability to translate ideas or to have good ideas, which is sort of the magic side of this work, the stuff that just comes to you, and the actual translating of it. That comes down to the language you use or the material you use to best show the idea you have and make it digestible to other people. And so there is a role for strategy and maybe even statistics and logic in what you're doing. And that's the thing that I'm exercising a lot right now in terms of the style of my writing and even the genre, letting go of the surrealism for a while in order to translate ideas, the same ideas, but through realism, just as a challenge and as another avenue that may expand your writing. Now, that's all well and good, but I think that the work you're doing is also very tied to your gut. And if your gut, which is not the loud voice in your head, but the small voice in your head, if that is leading you somewhere, I think it best to go down that road because that tends to be where the magic is. But an example of intuition in this Ogilvy book that I'm referencing from the podcast I heard it on, not from the book itself. The book itself you can't find it anywhere. But the podcast about the book said that essentially it's like, it's like, let's say you have an idea for, in this case, an ad, and, your coworker thinks it's funny, and the lady at the cafe thinks it's funny, and the cleaners think it's funny, and your wife thinks it's funny, your husband thinks it's funny, your boyfriend thinks it's funny, your friend thinks it's funny, the guy on the tram thinks it's funny. If that is the case, then that's probably more valuable than just what statistics alone will you can use as a guide. You know what I mean? Like, and which makes me think now about the fact that, and I think I heard Rick Rubin say this, that nobody knows what they want until it's in front of them, and that's very true. Statistics can be great it can be a great sort of piece of information to have, but it doesn't necessarily, relying on research and statistics and not quite enough on intuition and common sense, I think can lead you to making very timely art, but not necessarily timeless art. And I think that the things that have longevity, the works that touch us, no matter when we see them, are the things that are timeless and speak to humans on a deeper level. Whereas the timely work, which may seem hip now, and statistically seems like it'll do well, and might even do well, won't have the same amount of longevity as something that is led, I think, by what you could call intuition or a feeling. I think sometimes you just have to find out. You know what I mean? Free-spiritedness. This was a good one. The first rule: there are no rules. The second rule: don't forget the first rule. And persistence. How this was written, I really liked, because it said, never, never, it said never give up, never give up, never give up, never give up, never, 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 never give up, never give in. If they don't like the idea, bring them another. If they still don't like it, bring them another. If they still don't like it, bring the best damn idea you have. And persistence, if you look at any story of anybody with any large measure of success, you see two things. You see a lack of introspection, which not necessarily early in life, but a lack of introspection in terms of waking up in the morning and going, how do I feel today? A lot of successful people and artists have an iron drive to just get done what they have to get done. James Cameron's a great example of this. Like, he was like a truck driver and had a bunch of blue-collar jobs while he was at college, and he was still writing personal projects. Like, if you look at James Cameron's early routine, you see... Actually, if you look at him throughout all of his career, you see a man of iron persistence and excitement by what's difficult. Steve Jobs... Without Steve Jobs, personal computing would not exist in the form it exists now. But after some initial success and interest, that man was marked with enormous amounts of failure. The Next Cube, I mean, he was voted off Apple. The Macintosh failed. But he had a vision that he kind of just needed to wait for technology to catch up on. I mean, the idea of the personal computer in the form it is now in every household, it couldn't be necessarily achieved with the original Macintosh, but later on, like once he came back to Apple with the first iMac, I mean, that is a pretty revolutionary piece of tech. And then it became the iPod. Like Steve Jobs is a great case of somebody with a vision who saw a gap in the market, but just needed to needed to hunker down until the world caught up. And that's not a bad place to be. I mean, that's James Cameron with Avatar too. I don't have that. All of my ideas, are achievable in the 1960s. I don't have anything new. Fuck. But Is that the last one? Yeah, persistence. I also am thinking a lot about Kanye West right now, but I don't think he's, you know, he's certainly persistent, but early Kanye is a lot more inspiring than modern Kanye, depending on what side of the field you play on. So I wanted to share that with you because I think that was, and I think you should dive into it more yourself because I just think divine discontent. I mean, that's great. Not as a holistic lifestyle approach, but approaching this work, and I don't think it's a bad thing to be chasing something and demanding more of yourself than you are actually able to do at the given moment. I wrote a poem about that after running a marathon. I shared it, I think in the first episode, or the last episode, which was somewhere beyond your ability and between your desire, that is where your soul shines through. Touch it and you'll be gone, melted by the hot flame within. Burn like the star inside and disappear completely. Howl, howl, howl. And that howling just, I think, equates to working and showing up. Like I am today. I really didn't feel like doing this today, but I want to keep it going every week because we're in this together. Anyway, that's enough of me. This has been your really, really good friend, Ben. God bless.